Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Sunday edition of To The Point podcast. Everybody's doing well. It's been quite a weekend so far, and normally I don't podcast on the weekend because you get so much content when you get to Monday. But it's a Sunday, and through the NBA, through the NHL last night, through some really interesting games. Big UFC card that I didn't get to fit in. I had to watch this morning. And of course, college football, it's been a whirlwind 24 hours, just a Saturday. And I say this often and it's gratuitous, but it was one of the best Saturdays of sports in a long time. And I won't be able to say that for many more Saturdays. And the reason being is yesterday was the last college football Saturday when you can jump from college football to hockey to basketball. You can see Kenny Pickett fake a slide, then run in for a 58-yard score in the ACC championship game. Then you can switch the screen and see Marcus Foligno fight Wayne Simmons, and then see DeMar DeRozan go toe-to-toe with Kevin Durant down the stretch and get the Bulls to beat the number one team in the Eastern Conference. That's awesome. That's what you want. And there's so many places I could start today. And I am going to touch on some NHL storylines, games yesterday, a team that everybody likes to talk about. I think yesterday's loss was actually one of the most impressive games of the year for that team. Mark Scheifele getting a hat trick Friday night. It was impactful for me. So lots happening in the world of sports. But this weekend really was about finding out who was going to be in the college football playoff. The games were important. Some you feel like were, they're done. You're like, okay, that's it. This is how it's going to be. And we did see some shakeups. We saw some underdogs come through, and that's all you want at this time of year. You want some chaos. And, we talk about teams that were not the betting favorite that won this weekend. You have to start Friday night. Utah beating Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. Now, Utah had beaten Oregon just 2 weeks earlier, 38-7. They beat them 38-10. This game had no impact on the college football playoff, but yet again, it was another game that I watched and enjoyed. So we get to Saturday afternoon, Baylor, Oklahoma State. Well, this game did have playoff implications because Oklahoma State came in number 5. Just outside the college football playoff, something happens if Cincinnati loses, if Alabama loses to Georgia, they're likely the next team in, or as if me and Matt Wright talked about, maybe it would be Notre Dame because the television product in Oklahoma State doesn't exactly scream sex appeal. But we get into the game. Oklahoma State is known for its defense, and it played pretty well. They gave up 21 points. They gave up 0 points in the second half. But the difference in the game for Baylor is they caused 4 turnovers, 4 interceptions of junior quarterback Spencer Sanders. 2 of them were just horrendous, where he was, trying to avoid a sack, threw the ball in the air, and that's the cardinal sin of a quarterback. You never want to do that. They're without their best running back, Jerome Warren. And ultimately, Baylor made enough plays. Blake Shapen in his second career start threw 3 touchdown passes. And the drama of this game for me was, Oklahoma State gets the ball back with 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So basically a 2-minute drill, 2-minute offense for Oklahoma State. And they drive the ball down the field. And prior to this drive, they've driven the ball twice inside the 5 of Baylor, and they've come away with 6 points. That's how you lose games. Defenses now, they can't bash you like they did in the past. You can't run all over you. But what can they do? Play really good red zone defense and stop you from scoring points. Again, 6 points when there's 14 potential points on the board. That's how you win ball games. Well, 30 seconds left in the game. It's 4th and goal from the 1. They call an outside run. Don't know why. That's a tough angle, but they give it to Jackson. He's running to the outside, and just a fantastic play by the safety. As he cuts off his angle, Jackson dives for the pylon, but he comes up just inches short, and Baylor wins the game 21-16. And ultimately, this is not going to have a big effect on the college football playoff. What it does do is Baylor and Oklahoma State will have the same record. We'll find out later today at 1:00 when the committee will sit down and they'll pick. But this is about bowl games, but it's also Baylor lost Matt Rule to the NFL. He went to the Carolina Panthers. He had a great program there. They get a new head coach, and Baylor is just a program that continues to get better. New coaches, no brand names. You look at their quarterback play, it's very average, but they recruit very good defensive players. They know what they're doing, and it's another 10-2 season for Baylor. That's a great season for them, and definitely disappointing for Oklahoma State, who had a great year. They're going to lose Jerome Warren to the NFL. Spencer Sanders will likely return as a senior, but definitely a game they'd want back. So Oklahoma State out of it for the college football playoff. Then that brings us to, I think some people thought this was going to be the game of the day. For me, I love the Pittsburgh Wake Forest game. That had zero impact on the college football playoff, but I love watching Kenny Pickett play. I don't know. I think he'll go high in the draft. I don't know how good he'll be. I think rookie quarterbacks are always hyped. And I don't think he's not a Zach Wilson. I think he's got Josh Allen in him. That would be my comp to Kenny Pickett. If you haven't seen him play, he's big. He's got a pretty good arm. He's got legs like Josh Allen. So I do think he's got Josh Allen upside. And I do think he's a more accurate passer leaving college football than Josh Allen was at Wyoming. But at the 5:00 games was Georgia, Alabama, and Cincinnati, Houston. And these games both had huge impact on the college football playoffs because Cincinnati with a win would be 13-0. They would win the American Athletic Conference, and with a victory, and I say this, with a victory, they would be the first school out of the Power Five, outside of the Power Five conferences to make the college football playoff, meaning they're not in the Big 12. They're not in the SEC. They're not in the ACC. They're not in the Big 10. They're not in the Pac-12. They're in the American Athletic Conference. And Cincinnati has been a team that's been on the radar the whole year. Desmond Ridder, the senior quarterback. Luke Fickell, the head coach there, was rumored about potentially getting the Notre Dame job, but they gave it to Marcus Freeman in-house, who was the defensive coordinator. But he's got that school, and it reminds me of Gonzaga in college basketball, where Mark Few really had a program in Gonzaga that had no notoriety. But after years and years of developing great talent, getting to multiple Final Fours, it's not just a mid-major anymore. It's a really good school. It gets to national championship games. And Cincinnati, they had a one-loss season last year. They played Georgia in a bowl game that they should have won that game, but they threw it away late. But this game, it was a statement because Houston is a good football team. And through the first half, Cincinnati only led by a point going into second half, but they put the clamps down. They have guys on that defense that are going to play on Sundays. Desmond Ridder is going to be a NFL draft pick, and he's a senior. Alec Pierce, the wide receiver, is a senior. Wiley, the tight end, is a senior. Jerome Ford's a junior, but he'll likely be going to the NFL. Jerome Ford had 2 touchdowns of over 50 yards. You had Desmond Ridder throw 3 touchdown passes, only threw for $180, but he didn't need to do more than that. He used his legs when he had to. Defense came up with 2 picks of Tune from Houston, and Cincinnati closed off a Cinderella season for them, going 13-0. And if they do not make the college football playoff today, which they're going to, but I still have to wait because this committee is so corrupt. They're so stupid. And again, it sounds really simple, right? 13-0 team. They beat Notre Dame, everybody's favorite. They just won their conference game. Oklahoma State lost. The only other team that's really in the mix is Notre Dame, who they beat. and Notre Dame did not beat another ranked team on their schedule. But it could happen. That's how crazy this is. But Cincinnati's going to get into the Final Four. They'll likely be ranked 4, which is fine. And maybe they get crushed in the college football semifinal. But Notre Dame gets crushed. Clemson got crushed last year by Ohio State. So credit to Luke Fickell, credit to Cincinnati for getting into this position. The whole year, I doubted that this would happen, but they controlled their own destiny. They won every game that they played. And did they get some help? Of course. Oklahoma State losing, beating Notre Dame, Oklahoma losing to Oklahoma State a few weeks ago. They got some good breaks, and I think they took advantage of it. And kudos to them for capitalizing on that opportunity. So Cincinnati, 13-0. Then we get to Georgia, Alabama. And this game was the Heisman moment. Last week, quarterback Bryce Young from Alabama had a Heisman moment, but it was a Heisman moment after playing a really lackluster game. Auburn put the clamps on him. And all week, I heard from, guys on the mothership and different, podcast platforms. Well, Bryce Young had a Heisman. Well, what did he do the other 3 quarters? Stunk it up, could hardly score a point against Auburn, whose quarterback, JT Finley, a transfer from LSU, looked out to lunch. They couldn't do anything. But this week, he's playing the number 1 ranked defense in the country. Georgia is allowing 280 points a game on defense. They'd only allowed 7 offensive touchdowns all season. Jordan Davis is a monster at nose tackle. They got just Dean on defense. They got some guys that are going to be high draft picks that are great players. And what Bryce Young yesterday had 365 total yards in the first half himself, passing and using his legs. That's how productive Bryce Young was yesterday. He could not be stopped. He was a man amongst boys, going to Jamison Williams, finding John Mechie, going to Billingsley when he had to. It was just an incredible performance from Bryce Young. And it was 24-17 Bama at halftime. And it looked like, well, maybe Georgia can stay in this. Maybe Georgia can win this game. But it didn't turn out that way, because Alabama did not just beat Georgia. They beat their ass, winning 41-24. Bryce Young, 26 for 44, 421, 3 scores. He ran 3 times for 40 yards and a touchdown. It was vintage Alabama. It was Alabama beating, Nick Saban beating Kirby Smart for the 4th straight time. Kirby Smart's never beaten Nick Saban, who used to be an assistant coach for. And with this win, with the defense, Jordan Battle getting a pick 6, the Alabama defense came to play yesterday. It showed itself. And all year they've been under the radar because they've struggled. They lost A&M. They nearly lost to Auburn. Florida was a play away from beating them, but they survived those scares. And to Nick Saban's credit, he mentioned, and he had a little bit of a rant a few weeks ago, that it doesn't matter how you win, it's if you win. And looking back at that, he's right. If you win the game, that's all that matters. What did Herm Edwards say? You play to win the game. Well, they did. And they won those games that looked ugly. And at other sports, Tampa Bay was 7-5 last year. They won the Super Bowl. They lost to the Chicago Bears. Tom Brady didn't know if it was 5th down, 6th down. He was looking up in the sky like, am I playing football or Frisbee right now? But they got through it. And Alabama is now going to be ranked number 1 from the committee. This victory puts them into number 1, the pole position. And talking about these last two games in unison. Funny enough, they played at the same time. Alabama's going to play Cincinnati in one of the semifinals. That's going to be the 1-4 matchup. Georgia was number 1 all year. They are now dropped to 3, in my opinion. They're going to be 3. I'll talk about who they're going to play, but it's a stunning victory for me because I honestly thought Georgia was the best team in the nation. And maybe if there's a rematch, which I think there's going to be, we'll see a different result. But what do we see? Stetson Bennett for Georgia, when that defense is not playing at an all-pro level, Georgia is average because Stetson Bennett, their running game, they don't have a wide receiver that can get open. What does Georgia on offense, what do they do? And I like it. It's fun to watch. They use 3 tight ends. Their tight ends are the receivers. That's their offense. Zamir Cook and White are good backs. But Alabama said, you know what? We're going to stop the run. We're going to eliminate you from running the football. That's what Baylor did to Oklahoma State. They said, we know what you do better. We'll give it to your quarterback. We'll put the game in your quarterback's hands and see if he can win it. That's just vintage Bill Belichick. He says, I'm going to eliminate your strength, and you can try to beat me with your secondary offense. And most times it doesn't work. Well, Stetson Bennett threw 2 picks, including a house call. He, Brock Bowers is going to be an NFL tight end. Number 9. You'll watch for him in the college football semifinal. The guy's a stud, but they don't have what Pickens is I think he's like a gadget guy. He's like a Tavon Austin. I could see him being like that in the NFL, a guy who's used on special teams, but they don't have that receiver they don't have a Jamison Williams. They don't have a John Mechie III who get open, who are fast, who are just game breakers when you put the ball in their hands. So with all that being said, huge win for Alabama, huge statement, huge day for Bryce Young. Not only do I think this, puts him into the Heisman discussion, he's not going to exit school this year, but, NFL scouts can start to rave about, well, Bryce Young, what's he going to be like in the NFL? He's not the biggest guy, but he's got a big arm. And the only bad part for Alabama yesterday was that, Canadian receiver John Mechie III tore his ACL. He did not play the entire second half, and he's going to be out for the remainder of the season. And now Jamison Williams is a stud, but he can only do so much by himself. He can break open, get some big plays. But Billingsley, they need a guy to step up in that pass game when they play Cincinnati, when they get to the playoff, because if you're opposing defense, you say, okay, let's double Williams. We're going to blanket coverage him all day. Billingsley, other guys are going to have to beat us. Robinson out of the backfield, the running back. Okay. Take those guys, but we're not going to give you Williams every play, because yesterday he almost had 200 yards receiving himself. He almost had half of Bryce Young's passing yards, and a lot of those were yards after the catch because he's just so quick. So it's going to be Alabama, Cincinnati in the first semifinal. Second semifinal, we know it's going to be Georgia because they've been number 1 all year, but they get smoked. And they're going to play the Michigan Wolverines because Jim Harbaugh is leading Michigan into their first Final Four with him at the helm. And they destroy Iowa last night, 42-3. And I credit Iowa because they played hard. They were down 14-3 after halftime. But their offense is so inept. The fact that they went 10-3 on the season is really something to me. It tells you how good that defense was, because that offense is putrid. They can't run the ball. Spencer Petras has his accuracy is terrible, and they get into the red zone and they just seem to throw up all over themselves. But Michigan versus Georgia, I look at this game, and the way Michigan is going to win it is 2 things. They're going to need to play great defense, which they have the potential to do. They have 2 guys that are going to be first-round picks. They have Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson. I think Aiden Hutchinson, if Bryce Young didn't play so damn good yesterday, would win the Heisman. He was good. If I had a vote, he would have gotten my vote. prior to this weekend. And honestly, I still might vote for him if I had a vote, because he's just not a quarterback, and it's lazy to vote for a quarterback all the time. But nevertheless, so they have edge players that can get to the quarterback. And I just mentioned Stetson Bennett is not a great quarterback. He's a guy that, he's dink and dunk, throw to your tight ends, run the ball, but they have two ballers on, when it comes to pass rushers and what they do. So I look at that as a way that they're going to beat Georgia. They're going to need to run the football. They got Hassan Haskins. They got Blake Corum. They got Donovan Edwards, who is a running back. He's more of a scat back. And what I mean by that is he's a guy you give the ball to out of the backfield on third down situations, a Darren Sproles type back where he comes into the game, he's going to catch passes. He's not going to run that often. But what did he do yesterday? They had a gadget play. He threw a 75-yard touchdown pass. Just to put that into perspective, Cade McNamara had 169 yards passing for the entire game. So I don't love their offense. I think Shoemaker's good at tight end. I think Eric, they're similar when it comes to their offenses because they're great. Georgia's pretty good at running the football, as is Michigan. They play good defense and they rely a lot on their tight ends. Eric All, Shoemaker, these guys are their offense. Wilson's a good player, but running backs and tight ends, this is just how they play football. So Michigan, Georgia, I think it's going to be a fun game. I think the two games are vastly different because Cincinnati's defense yesterday, especially in the first half against Houston, Houston was doing whatever they wanted against them. That's troubling against Alabama. I don't know if that game's going to be close. I think you could see, Alabama won yesterday 41-24. I think that could be the score in the semifinal. I think Michigan has a realistic shot of beating Georgia. I think they could. I'd still favor Georgia, but they just have that feel. Michigan this year, they beat Ohio State. You're like, okay, are they going to have a letdown in the Big Ten championship game? No, they destroy Iowa. So looking ahead, the semifinals are on New Year's Eve, which is stupid, but I won't go on my rant about that today. I'm interested to see what happens because I don't think, maybe Michigan will be 2, Georgia will be 3, but there's no way that this changes. It's going to be Georgia. It's going to be Alabama, Cincinnati. It's going to be Michigan against Georgia. The fun thing about today as well is that the bowl games are announced, and bowl games are meaningless for the most part. However, there are schools that benefit. I mentioned Cincinnati. UCF had a really important bowl game a few years ago. Coastal Carolina. Schools can put themselves on the map for the next few football seasons so that they are ranked. They are in the discussion. And Cincinnati would not be in the Final Four if they didn't have great seasons, if they didn't play Georgia, an SEC school, in a bowl game. To think, even for people to say, Cincinnati's playing Georgia in a bowl game, that would make no sense. Okay, no, we don't want to see Georgia win the blow. It came down to the last possession of the game. And now Cincinnati and Georgia, who played in a bowl game just little less than a year ago, are going to both be in the college football playoffs. That's what these bowl games can do. And like I said, I think Michigan and Georgia is going to be a really good game. I think that's going to be a semifinal that is close. It's not a blowout, and we'll see who makes it to the national championship game. But New Year's 6 games for Baylor, for Utah, for Marcus Freeman with Notre Dame. Who are they going to play? We'll find out those games today. And for me and Matt Wright's sake, I hope there's a game on Christmas Eve. There will be, but it's always at 3:00 in the afternoon. It's always like Hawaii and San Antonio, and I'll watch that because there's no sports on. But could you please put a football game on at 8:00 or 7:00? Again, I don't go to church on Christmas, I mean, I don't go to church on days that are not Christmas either, but throw a guy a bone here. I don't want to watch Christmas Vacation. I don't want to watch Home Alone. That's just not me. I don't like Christmas flicks. And, you're going to force me to watch The Office on Christmas by myself because I don't want to watch a Christmas movie. And that sounds really bad. And my family won't like to hear that. But nevertheless, I hope we get that. I know we won't. But a guy can hope that we see a great bowl game on Christmas Eve. But the committee will let us know today. That's my predictions. I don't see how they change. But, for me today, the real interest is seeing the bowl games, some of the matchups, how many players decide to play in them. Do they opt out? Do they stay? That type of thing with the NFL on the horizon for many of these young men. So great day of football yesterday. And, can't wait to see what happens in the coming weeks as well. The NHL was also on full display yesterday. We saw some really interesting matchups between, Western and Eastern Conference teams. And this is fun. These are the matchups I like because they're potential, playoff previews. If you get to a Stanley Cup final, you only get to see these matchups twice a year. And, seeing St. Louis play Tampa twice last week, seeing St. Louis play Florida yesterday in a matinee. These are fun games. Yes, both teams are without great players. Sasha Barkov's been out for a while. Anthony Duclair was not available. Jordan Binnington's on COVID protocol. David Perron was out. But, last week, Florida came back from 4-1 deficits to win games. Well, yesterday they played dominant, but they trailed most of the game. And if you're looking at Florida and their weakness, it's off the rush. And that's what St. Louis does really well. I look at St. Louis as a fast break team where they break out of the zone, they get a 3-on-2, a basketball, you get numbers coming back. You find a guy, he shoots a spot up three. Well, the puck movement from St. Louis is what they do extremely well. You look at the line of Logan Brown, Barbashev, and Joshua, who's just called up. Logan Brown was traded from the Ottawa Senators earlier this season. They were the most effective St. Louis line yesterday. Barbashev is a guy that was a great player in the queue, scored a lot of points. Coming into the NHL, he had to morph his game. He had to become a fighter, become a guy who hit like a wrecking ball and played a fourth line role when St. Louis won the Stanley Cup in 2019. But you're already seeing he's scoring goals this year. He's got 8 goals, I believe, already. He's a guy that is starting to get more offensive opportunities. And St. Louis needs that because they need that, multiplicity when it comes to scoring goals because Perron can get hot, but, Braden Shen, Ryan O'Reilly have been cool to start the year. And Florida dominated this game, but St. Louis capitalized on mistakes. And when they got odd man rushes, when they got opportunities, they scored. But kudos to Florida. Florida, I think the two teams in the state of Florida are the best at producing prospects, at producing players who have failed in other locations, who have just, kind of cast-offs or late round draft picks. They just find ways for them to be successful. Tampa did it with Yanni Gourde. We've gone through the laundry list. Zach Bogosian turned his career around in Tampa Bay after being bought out by the Buffalo Sabres. They just find these guys and they really start to flourish, start to have success in these locations. And I look at Florida. Anthony Duclair was a good player, but in Ottawa, he had a tough second half of the season and nobody really wanted him on the free agent market. Florida said, okay, we'll take him. Carter Verhaeghe has been a great player for the Florida Panthers, a guy I love to see play because he's got a ton of heart and he balls out. Mackenzie Weegar was a 7th round draft pick, and I watched him yesterday. He's their most sound defensive player, but he also brings a lot to the table offensively. And there's a reason that Dave Poulin had him ranked 50 on the top 50 players list because he's legit. And another guy who scored 2 goals yesterday, Maxim Mammon, is a Euro who came over, who didn't have a lot of success. He's only got 3 goals in the year. but he scores 2 yesterday. And with the injuries, he's playing on a second line and he gets opportunities. The tying goal, 3 minutes left, it's right off a draw. He's ready. It's a set play. He lets it go and he beats Philly Husso. Again, just finding talent. And ultimately, Florida wins the game in the gimmick. And I've said this all year. I do think they have some weaknesses. I look at their back end. I don't love it. I think you look at Ekblad, check. Olympics, book it. Book him, Dano. Gudas is I think Gudas has only gotten better throughout his career. When he first came over, I think he was just he was a Robert Bertuzzo type defenseman, watching them both yesterday. But Gudas is becoming a puck-moving defenseman. He's not just a big, burly guy that will beat you down defensively. I think he's really improved, going from, Philly to Florida. But you look at the bottom of their defense core, they could use an upgrade. And I'm sure they'll look to do that at the trade deadline. But with the additions of Bennett, with their forward group, and Huberdeau is just a star. So they have it going on in Florida. But impressively, they outshot them 50-24. It was really Ville Husso had a great game, and kudos to St. Louis to come up with a point in a game where they really didn't deserve one. The other big game of the day, and this was a loss for, Canada's most popular team. And this team is on a roll. They'd won 15-17 coming into this game. They have Sportsnet talking about them every other second. Well, that's not exactly breaking news. They do that now. But they do that all the time. They do that when they suck. But this team is playing really good hockey. And that would be the Toronto Maple Leafs. They had a slow start. I told everybody to take a chill pill, including my parents. And people didn't really want to seem to listen to me. But now they're playing great. No, we knew they were a good team. Okay. But the Leafs yesterday played a Minnesota team. And Minnesota, nobody knows Minnesota because Minnesota plays in Minnesota. They play in the Western Conference. They play in the Central, and nobody cares. Well, Minnesota's one of the best teams in the NHL. They're right up there with Toronto. They scored more goals this season than Toronto. Little fun fact. And they're in the Minnesota's very similar to Toronto. If you look at their past over the last number of seasons, Minnesota is a team that gets to the first round of the playoffs and loses. They went through Bruce Boudreau. They went through the Zach Parise days and Ryan Suter and Jason Zucker. They would get to that first round of the playoffs and fail. They gave them big, long contracts and it just didn't work. But they've gone through a metamorphosis where they got Kirill Kaprizov, who was their first round pick. They got him to come over. He had a great rookie season. He won the Calder. They gave him a boatload of money, but he is a good player. Yoel Arsenault, another first round pick, took a while to develop, but the guy can play. Marcus Foligno is a guy that was just a fourth line winger that looked like a fighter. He's got 9 goals on the season. I love Marcus Foligno. He could be on my team any day of the week. Their back end is solid, and they got a goalie tandem. And as you all know, I don't love tandems, but Cam Talbot to me is a number one goalie now. He played phenomenal last night for Minnesota when he had to. But I look at the game, and Minnesota through, I would say, 30 minutes of the game, at least the first half of the game last night, played their style. Minnesota likes to muck it up. They have skill. They can play off the rush with you if you want. But I think Dean Evison, who's a very smart head coach, he's been there since replacing Bruce Boudreau, knows that Toronto likes to play an up-tempo game. They got fast players. They got Austin. They got Bill. There was no Mitchie Marnes last night. But that's just their type of game. They're free-flowing. They like to play that up-tempo game. But Minnesota has a roster that can do anything you want. But at the same time, they look at it and say, well, we're best when it's played against the boards, when there's no middle of the ice, when we eliminate time and space. Minnesota plays playoff hockey on December, what was it yesterday? 4th. That's just what they do. They don't make it. It's very tough for you to get open ice. It's very tough to get open against this team. And through 30 minutes, that's exactly what they did. They didn't give Toronto time to have puck on their sticks. They were on you. They didn't let you breathe out there. And that was what you saw. You saw guys like Eriksson Ek, like Jordan Greenway, like Foligno, Ryan Hartman. He's an irritant, but he's having his career season in Minnesota here. But you look, they score goals on the power play. Zuccarello, they get to the front of the net. It's not easy to play against Minnesota, and it's not fun. And through 30 minutes, they look like Minnesota was just getting the better of Toronto. But this is why I credit Toronto. And if you're a Leafs fan, I would be more encouraged after a loss than half the wins they got. Because I watched the Colorado game. I didn't think they played that well. They won 8-3, but no, Jonas Johansson, who might as well have been Adam Beers, was in net on Wednesday night. The guy could stop a beach ball. And so, kudos to Matthews. You get a hat trick, bully for you. But I don't leave that game, waving pom-poms. Last night, I would be bullish about this game. And it's one game, but it's more than one game when you're playing against a team that's going to be a playoff team, that's going to be a factor, and that plays a different style than you. And why I would be encouraged is Toronto struggled playing with the against the boards, 0 time, 0 space game. If you watch that first 30 minutes of the game, it wasn't close who was the better team. If you thought Toronto was, come over and we'll rewatch the game, and I'll tell you why they weren't. But what did they do? They found a way to change the game. You're halfway through the game. You're down 3-0. They morphed the game into playing their style. And through rule changes, we're seeing cross-checking is more of an emphasis. I think the NHL wants playoff hockey to be different. They want it to be more like the regular season. And I'm not completely on board. I'm not on board with that. I think physical hockey is always has to be a part of the game. Physicality is sports, but I think there's ways around it. That's what I look at what Toronto did last night. They made the game more free-flowing. Minnesota had time and space. Well, Toronto opened it up. They used that the entire ice to their advantage, and they got Minnesota to take penalties because Minnesota has guys that aren't as quick as Toronto. And you saw them take tripping penalties, take cross checks because they were trying to eliminate guys from in front of the net. And what did the Leafs do? They scored 2 power play goals. That's what they do best. They have one of the best power plays in hockey. It's still baffling to me that how bad it was last year, and they had the same guys on their team. Maybe because Manny Malhotra is not running the power play anymore when he was a penalty killer. Maybe that's why it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But this Jason Spezza had a 3-point night. The wily veteran. Matthews scores a tap-in on the power play. But they played their game. And in the third period, tied at 3, it was more free-flowing than it was in the first period and a half. Minnesota didn't put the clamps on. And, the Leafs losing the gimmick. I stopped watching after the overtime. I don't watch the gimmick because I hate, again, it's a shootout, but I call it the gimmick if you're a first-time listener. I hate it. I don't think it should be a part of the game. But nevertheless, people and, little kids like it. So whatever. And the refs tried to throw Toronto the game in overtime on that call when that was not a penalty, but makeup call or something. That was a joke. But this game was a positive for Toronto. You're without Marner. You get a point. So you're still with Florida, even though they got games in hand. And, you played a good road game. They played a lot of road games lately. This is the difficult part of their schedule, where they were out in Cali. Then they're in Minnesota. They're in Winnipeg tonight. They go to Western Canada before Christmas. But you're going through all these Western trips, and then you have none the rest of the season, basically. So that's a nice luxury to have as well, is that you don't go on many other trips. So you get them out of the way early, and the rest of the season, it's less travel. It's easier on you physically and mentally. But I would say kudos to Toronto. They got Winnipeg tonight. That should be a good game because Friday night, Winnipeg finally, broke the hourglass, so to speak, when they scored 8 goals against New Jersey. And Jonathan Bernier had a terrible game. He looked out to lunch. He looked like back in his Leafs days. But the bigger moment for me for Winnipeg is that Mark Scheifele had a hat trick. Blake Wheeler scored a goal. They're superstars. Their key ingredients found the back of the net. It wasn't just the Kyle Connor show. It wasn't just Andrew Kopp. Nick Ehlers found the back of the net. And, Connor Hellebuck still had a shaky season, in my opinion. He hasn't exactly been great, but he did enough to get them to win the game. And Winnipeg defensively has been solid. But you look at those guys, this is the key to them being good, successful, long-term. Having these guys score. Nick Ehlers, 2 goals. Pierre-Luc Dubois has been great all year. He's got 11 goals, 9 assists in 23 games. He hasn't been an issue. Andrew Kopp's got 18 points in 23 games. You'll take that from him. Kyle Connor, I don't need to talk about him anymore. He's a stud. Adam Lowry, he scores a goal. So he's only got 5 points. They need more from him. Svechnikov's got 1 goal. They need guys to step up, but a guy like Blake Wheeler, who is a key part of their team, he is their captain. For him to continue to have some success, to get on the board, is really important to me. And they got Toronto tonight on a back-to-back. I don't know who's going to start. Joseph Wall, I don't know what he was not available last night. He wasn't on the bench. Hutchinson was the backup. So, if I'm Toronto, I go with Jack Campbell again tonight. They play, I think, Tuesday at home. But again, if you're number 1 goalie, you can go on back-to-backs. This isn't illegal to put a goalie on a back-to-back night. I know it seems like it is because that's how the league is going here. But he would be starting if it was me, because I'm not throwing away 2 points, because that's what you're doing with Michael Hutchinson. The guy stinks. You don't throw away 2 points in this league. You go and get it done. So we'll see what they decide. But kudos to Toronto. I thought they played a really solid game last night. They ultimately lose, but you put yourself in a position to win. And if I'm a Leafs fan, I'm pretty encouraged by that outcome. Also in the NHL last night, you saw Tampa beat Boston in overtime. The Boston Bruins concern me because you look at that team, and I think I've heard people mention David Krejci for a long. I don't buy into that. David Krejci's been on the downswing of his career for a long time now. He's not the same player he once was, including last year. And this team would not be breaking records. They would not be one of the best teams in the NHL if David Krejci was on the roster. Sorry to all the Bruins super fans out there, but that's just a fact. But they've gone through a lot with COVID. But you look at this team, it's still why they haven't won a cup in the last decade. They've gotten close, but when it comes down to it, it's the top line, it's perfection line or nothing. They got Pasternak, Marchand, Bergeron, and I look around and say, well, what else? Okay, Charlie Coyle is a good player, but he's so frustrating because he's so inconsistent. His work ethic is very questionable, and he doesn't bring you much. Taylor Hall hasn't been good this year. I mean, let's just be honest. You can play well, and I mentioned guys that just play well. They have a good role, and he has nights where he does that. But there's also, you need to produce. It's not just, well, he played really well last night. You need to put some pucks in the back of the net. He's got 11 points in 21 games. As a second line winger, as a guy that gets paid very well, you can't have 5 goals in 21 games. You can't have 11 points. You just can't happen. Because you look at the rest of their team, their forwards. DeBrusk has 7 points in 20 games. Now, DeBrusk is a guy I wanted to bring up because they're gonna try to trade him. I think the two sides do need a divorce here. He needs a fresh start. I like Jake DeBrusk personally. I think he's gonna succeed where he goes. And I watched a lot of that Calgary Anaheim game on Friday night, and Calgary continues to surprise me, and kudos to them because they're first in the Pacific Division. Jacob Markstrom, I think, is the front runner for the Vezina. They do have a balance. They're getting balanced, but Johnny Gaudreau is playing well. Elias Lindholm, who I still think is the best player on that roster, is playing well. The third line scored 2 goals Friday night from Sean Monahan and also from Blake Coleman. So they get distribution throughout their lineup. Lucic has had a strong start to the season. But I think that Jake DeBrusk would be a great ad for the Calgary Flames because I think he could play Daryl Sutter's style. And if he doesn't, Daryl Sutter will let him hear it. If I look at their wingers, he's an upgrade over Trevor Lewis. He's an upgrade over Tyler Pitlick. Brad Richardson plays center, but again, he's an upgrade over him. The bottom of their lineup, he's an upgrade over Dylan Dubé. And what you can do is Dylan Dubé can play on that fourth line, promote Tkachuk, and put him in a position where he can play a second line role. I think giving him the opportunity to do that would be huge. I do think Edmonton's another team that could benefit from him. The salary cap structure would be tough. Do you think those two Western Canadian teams would be teams to look into him? And also, a team that played Calgary, I don't think Anaheim is a bad situation either. They're a very young team, and I really enjoy watching Anaheim because they're just so young. They do make a lot of mistakes, but they're fun to watch. Jamie Drysdale I think he's gonna be a great NHL player. You look Adam Henrique, they got veterans all over that lineup. They got veterans and youngsters. That's all they have. I think Josh Manson, he's only got 4 points, but he's playing really good hockey, especially Friday night. Sonny Milano, who's a cast-off in Columbus, he's got 17 points in 20 games. He's having a good season. Ricard Raquel is one of their more disappointing forwards. Silverberg only has 1 goal. But you look at Troy Terry, he's got 25 points in 24 games. Trevor Zegras had 2 points the other night. He has 21 points in 23 games. But could you put him on the wing? Absolutely. Could you replace Lettery or Delory, Carrick? I mean, they have a lot of the same guys. I think DeBrusk plays a physical style. He'd fit in with this young lineup. And I could see him going to Anaheim. So I would kick tires on that. So I think he's a really fun experiment. And I realize some Bruins fans probably are fed up with Jake DeBrusk, with his attitude and with the way he's handled things. But I do think he's a good player. And Boston, I look at it, they need something. They need some forwards for sure. But on that back end, they could use some additions. Do they go after a Hampus Lindholm? Do they try to get a Josh Manson? I think that could work. But they got some struggles there, and Boston needs to figure it out quick, or they're going to miss the playoffs. Last night, Alex Ovechkin became the second fastest player to score 750 goals, and just incredible from him. He's got 20 goals in the year. He's tied for the league lead. Whenever he does something special, it just doesn't surprise me anymore. That's just Alex Ovechkin. They get a win last night. They're first in the Metro, 15-4-6. They beat Columbus, and that's just what he does. He's the greatest goal scorer in the history of the game. There's no denying it. And it's incredible what he's done over the course of his career and how he's done it for so long and so consistently. But kudos to him and to Washington. They continue to chug along. And as we look forward to today, Tampa will be in Philly to play tonight. Philly is really struggling. They need to figure it out. Islanders, Blackhawks, two of the most disappointing teams in hockey. You got Kings, Oilers, and Flames, Golden Knights. Those couple of fun games today in the National Hockey League. The NBA has been, it's always quiet until Christmas in the NBA. You always hear one of the most talked about phrases, well, we'll figure out if this team's any good by Christmas. And normally that's true, but I do think this NBA season has sparked some intrigue early because you've seen some really dominant teams come out of the gate. Golden State and Phoenix are both 19-4. Golden State loses to San Antonio last night, but Phoenix and Golden State split their battles this week. Steph Curry has emerged as MVP frontrunner. Phoenix, after winning the NBA championship, continues to battle, continues to win games. And they want to get back there. They lost to Milwaukee, but we'll see if they can figure it out and potentially get back. Milwaukee has struggled out of the gate. Boston Celtics haven't looked great. Utah Jazz continue to just hang around. They're a good team. Denver hasn't been great. People are freaking out in New York because the Knicks are back to what they used to be, the Knicks, and they don't look like the team they were last year. Brooklyn had their own struggles, even though they're first in the East. But you're starting to see some people, and you're starting to see the team get better because James Harden is playing better basketball. And James Harden needs a month and change to get into shape, because he comes into the season out of shape. He uses the season to get in shape, which is not exactly recommended, but that's what he's done so far. And to be fair to him, he's had a pretty solid career. But so he's starting to play well. He did a triple-double the other night. They eked out a win. But you see, they're winning close games. They barely beat Minnesota. But last night was a really interesting game to me because they battled the Chicago Bulls. And the Chicago Bulls really, through an offseason and a trade deadline last year, really changed their roster. They acquired Nikola Vucevic, who was a frequent all-star game appearance, a guy who made the all-star teams in Orlando, but they were a team that would make the first round of the playoffs and get bounced. They went through a rebuild. They shipped him to Chicago. Then they signed Lonzo Ball in free agency, who was playing for New Orleans, who's only gotten better year after year. And they signed DeMar DeRozan, who was traded from the Raptors to San Antonio 3 years ago, played his years in San Antonio, and now he's a Bull. So you look at this team and say, well, Vucevic is a good player, as is DeMar DeRozan, but DeMar DeRozan can't shoot threes. He's not really a modern-day NBA player. Lonzo Ball, jury's still out on him. Well, they also had Zach Levine, who is a stud. They got Alex Caruso in the offseason. Again, they've changed their roster. And last night was a really impressive game, and I look at DeMar DeRozan primarily. DeMar DeRozan went toe-to-toe with Kevin Durant down the stretch. And to be honest, he was better than Kevin Durant because he was making clutch shots. He made clutch free throws. He made 3 field goals in the last minute and 29 seconds. And the Bulls ultimately won in Brooklyn by 4 points. And Zach Levine had 31. Lonzo Ball only had 8 points last night, but he had 7 assists, 9 rebounds. And what does Chicago do? They play really good defense. Lonzo Ball has played good defense since he's come into the NBA, but he's improved his 3-point shot. DeMar DeRozan seems to know what he's doing now. He's not shooting a ton of threes, and if he does, it's in the corner and he's wide open. He will take that mid-range shot because that's his shot. Levine will shoot the threes. Levine's also a good guy in the mid-range. But you look at the Bulls; they are 16-8. The Nets are 16-7. This is just how impressive it's been for the Chicago Bulls. They know how to play really good they play really good basketball. They're a smart team. And Milwaukee's 15-9. They're starting to figure it out. Washington's 14. Miami, Cleveland, Boston, Charlotte. But I think with the Bulls roster, I like the size element. The Brooklyn Nets do not have any size. When it comes to, I believe last night they had LaMarcus Aldridge playing center. That is not exactly something you want because he's not a big dude. He's a power forward. That's not his strength to play center. And, they got Bembry, who doesn't bring you a lot of size, but you look at their bench, Paul Millsap is their backup center. Blake Griffin's out of the rotation. He's unplayable right now. Acquiring a big man would be huge. A guy who's in New Orleans, their team's struggling. They're not going to make the playoffs. I look at the Brooklyn Nets. Do they go after a guy like Jonas Valanciunas? He's a guy who has the 3-point shot when he wants to. He dominates the paint. He's a really good rebounder. And I look at this conference. They lost to Milwaukee last year, primarily because Giannis could get to the paint at will. Because they had guys, PJ Tucker got to the paint. They scored their points in the paint. The Miami Heat has Bam Adebayo. He can get to the paint. The Bulls, I just mentioned Vucevic. He's a guy that has a low post game. Celtics struggle at it. But you look at the top teams in this conference. Washington, Cleveland with Jared Allen. They have players like Philadelphia who are 12-11. I expect them to get better. Joel Embiid can dominate in the paint when he wants to. So I give Chicago a ton of credit. They won a huge game last night. I think it's been a great year for the Ball family. LeVar Ball has two sons in the NBA. One went second overall, one went third overall. And he has been a running joke for a long time here, but he got his kids into the NBA. And they are both playing really good basketball. LaMelo Ball is playing on Charlotte. He looks like a guy, he's so fun to watch. Chicago is one of the best teams in the NBA. So I still think that Brooklyn can get to the NBA championship, but acquiring a big man would be pivotal because yes, Patty Mills is a good player. I think he's even more important in the playoffs because he's just a clutch player. He's played a ton of playoff games. He knows what's that about. James Harden needs to continue to play better, get in better shape. Bruce Brown, it'd be nice if Blake Griffin could get back into the rotation, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's bought out come the trade deadline and they move on without him. But I still think there's some holes in Brooklyn. I would, if I had to bet right now, I would still say Milwaukee's the favorite to get back to the NBA championship because they did it last year. They're going to miss PJ Tucker, who's in Miami, but Giannis is still there. Middleton, Drew Holiday. You look at Allen, who's coming off the bench. DiVincenzo will be back. They still have a really, really good roster. And, out west, I think Golden State, Phoenix cleared. I think Utah is the next best team. The Lakers lost to the Clippers on Friday night. The Clippers haven't had Kawhi Leonard all season. Clippers are really just an average team, as are the Lakers. So lots to be decided still in the NBA season, but it's always the gear ahead to Christmas. And as we get closer to that date, and the Christmas Day games this year are as follows, as I'm going to pull them up here. It's always a fun day. You will have some NBA, some NFL this year, but Hawks, Knicks, they met in the first round of the playoffs last year, and that's going to be at MSG, so that should be fun. Celtics, Bucks, the Celtics playing on Christmas is really more about their brand, it's kind of like a Detroit Lions, Dallas Cowboy thing because they don't really deserve it. Golden State, Phoenix, love it. We saw them twice this week, but that's a great game. Brooklyn at the Lakers, the two betting favorites to make the NBA finals before the season, and it's capped off with Mavericks, Jazz. So some great games, and that's kind of the gear up to Christmas in the NBA. Now today, obviously it's NFL Sunday, and there's some interesting games today for sure. It's kind of a week where you see a lot of guys are hurt, and Jalen Hurts might not play today for the Philadelphia Eagles. It might be the Gardner Minshew show when they go to play the Jets. Kyler Murray is expected to return for the first time in over a month after coming off a bye week and missing 3 games for the Arizona Cardinals. But to me, the game of the day is Cincinnati against the Chargers, because Cincinnati is 7-4. They're playing some really good football. They're starting to use Joe Mixon effectively. They're running the football. Their offensive line is winning at the line of scrimmage. Their outside run game is pivotal. And, they're using Joe Burrow, but he's not being asked to be Superman. He's finding his open receiver, passing it to Jamar Chase, to Tyler Boyd, to Azuma. He's just doing what he has to do. They're picking up first downs effectively. And they play the Chargers, who are 6-5, just hanging around in that playoff discussion. But the Chargers seems like every 1 week they have a great game, and then the next week they come out and lay an egg. They lose to the Denver Broncos last week, a division rival, and that's a game they definitely want back. They're a better team than Denver, but Justin Herbert has had Jekyll and Hyde moments this season, as has Brandon Staley, the head coach. And this is the first meeting from 2 guys who went in the same draft class. Joe Burrow went first overall, obviously winning the Heisman at LSU. Justin Herbert went 6th overall, playing at Oregon. And, these guys will be linked forever because they're in the same draft class. But also, one's 7-4, one's 6-5. They could leave today with the same record, with vying for wild card positions. And I also think this is a bigger game. It's a bigger game for LA because they would be 6-6, and that it's gonna be tough to make the playoffs. You need wins in the AFC. It's a tougher conference when it comes to making the team as a wild card. But I look at Cincinnati, and I believe Cincinnati is the best team in the AFC North. I believe Cincinnati can win that division. That Cleveland loss looks worse and worse when they got demolished 41-16, but they play them again. They play Baltimore again. They destroyed Baltimore their first meeting. They've beaten Pittsburgh twice this season. But Baltimore is a team to me. I love Lamar Jackson. He had a terrible game last week. I expect them to be better today against Pittsburgh. But I look at Cincinnati's roster, Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson on defense. Their defense is great. And again, Joe Burrow is a great quarterback. Jamar Chase is an elite receiver. This team has a lot of weapons. They have a lot of good things going for it. And I believe they're better than Baltimore. Lamar is great, Mark Andrews, but Rashad Bateman's a rookie. I don't trust him. Hollywood Brown's too Jekyll and Hyde for me. Their running game is inept. Their defense is banged up. I just look at Cincinnati and say, they play Baltimore again. You beat them. You win your games that you have to. They should be able to win the AFC North. And who knows, with a good run, I mean, the Patriots play the Bills twice, and the Bills play the Patriots twice. So I expect each team to win a game there. So that's a wash. If Cincinnati could have an unreal run down the stretch, they could have the number one record in the AFC and get a first-round bye. Again, that sounds crazy right now, but I would not rule it out because they have the team to do it. Baltimore has the number one record in the AFC right now. Does anybody think Baltimore's a world beater? No. And, Kansas City is that sleeping dragon. They could get the bye because they could win out. I truly believe they could. They got Denver tonight, Sunday Night Football. That's a difficult game, but at the same time, they should win it. Then Kansas City has the Raiders. Well, they beat the Raiders in Vegas. We'll see what the Raiders got the Washington football team today. We'll see what happens there. Then the Raiders go to play the Chargers. The Chiefs go to play the Chargers on a Thursday night. They lost to the Chargers the last meeting, but we'll see if they can get some revenge. Then the Chiefs play the Steelers. Well, I think at home, I think the Chiefs will win that game. They play the Bengals, which could be a massive game. That's the second last week of the season. That's a huge game. And then they finish against Denver, I believe. Yes, they finish against Denver. So, they don't have an easy schedule. Cincinnati, I mentioned, they don't have one either. I mean, they got Chargers today. Then they go and play the 49ers, but they're at home against not an easy game, but it's a winnable game. That's for sure. Then they go play at the Broncos. So they can win that game. And it's not a cakewalk, but they can win that game. They play the Ravens again in week 16. Then they play the Chiefs, and then they close with Cleveland. So we'll see. But I do think that this Bengals team has a chance to win to be the number one seed in the AFC. And we'll see if it comes to fruition, but I would not rule it out. The other big news yesterday was Adam Schefter reported that Big Ben Roethlisberger is expected to retire after this season. That's not a big surprise to me. I don't think the Steelers will bring him back regardless. I don't see him playing for another team. But they play Baltimore today. They're 5-5-1. And, the Steelers, we write them off because they look inept. And it wouldn't shock me if they beat Baltimore today. As crazy as that sounds, if that defense can wake up, it would not shock me if they beat Baltimore today because Baltimore has some weaknesses. So I'm not saying Pittsburgh's dead. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. But would it surprise me to see them beat Baltimore today? No, because it's a division game. Division games are weird, and we'll see what comes of it today. But fun show today. I'll be back tomorrow to break down all the NFL action and talk about what you can expect this week on the podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed this Sunday edition. Enjoy the football, enjoy the hockey, the college football selection show at 1:00, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.